Hello and welcome to the second of 3 modules for conflict resolution skills training for the Sierra Club Colorado chapter. This was a live training on July 13th, 2019 that was also recorded and hosted via webinar and led by CDR Associates. The second module, is going to focus on interest-based problem solving. It'll have some exercises in identifying interests compared to positions. And so it's really focused on helping to develop the skills necessary for resolving disputes and to apply some conflict resolution principles to challenges faced in the club.
Address it. Has anyone heard of interest-based problem solving? Great. Megan, what do you know about interest-based problem solving?
It's the conversation about values. So when folks are speaking about their position, you instead try to get to the why behind it, and see if you can find how to make the whys that people are sharing align.
Right, exactly. So looking underneath positions, which can be really hard because, well, especially with Sierra Club, a lot of the values is why people are participating in Sierra Club. It's to advocate for those values, and it can be hard to hear. Positions that don't align with those values. But what we're trying to do here is move away from positional bargaining, positional negotiation. A lot of times we know how to do that already, and move toward opportunities for interest-based negotiation, interest-based problem solving. It's not appropriate for everything. There are times when you are advocating, you are negotiating, and this might not be a useful tool. But a lot of times if you're working with membership or you're working to diffuse situations, this can be worth trying. It's not necessarily about compromising or about getting steamrolled. It's not about saying, okay, I agree with what you're saying and just letting your position and so part of it is stating your values very clearly, because what we're trying to get is to mutual understanding, mutual gains. So what we're not trying to do here is say, just listen to what everyone else is saying and don't address your own interests, but it's trying to get beyond positions to the underlying needs that we all have. It's really important to use this if the relationship is important. So a lot of times positional negotiation, positional bargaining destroys relationships because you will get so dug in with your heels that you can't see past your own nose. So a lot of times if the relationship is important, we will use these types of strategies. It's really an educational tool. It's when you're trying to figure out, okay, if I'm really trying to dive in and see what the other folks are thinking, this is a great tool to use as well, as opposed to taking a positional stance from the beginning. Meeting other people's needs and interests, and creating collaborative situations and cooperative problem solving. So that's where we're going with interest-based negotiation, problem solving. Next slide, please. Great. So again, here's the difference. A difference between a position and an interest. So a position is what you're doing when you think you're right, and we all have ideas of when we really think we're right, and we see that right now at our political situation. We tend to really dig in our heels into what is right. It's become very black and white. And one thing that's come up in current politics is it's really hard to feel like changing your mind is okay, because we're in a political situation where you're either on this side or you're on that side, and to change your mind is almost to like betray your identity. So what we talk about too is, when is it okay to change your mind? When is it okay to not dig in your heels on a position or a value? And that's not something that we're doing as a culture right now. Right now, we're not changing our minds because that's looked at as a weakness. So that's just sort of a conceptual thing to think about as we move through this practice. We are opponents, so it's set up as that. And I know with Sierra Club, it's an activist group. And so a lot of times there are real opponents to things that you might think are destroying the environment, destroying communities. So there might be those oppositional roles, but how can we look at this as a bigger picture? So it's more systems thinking in that way. A concession is a weakness. There's one right solution forward, and the pie is limited, and the goal is to win. And sometimes that's the case. I know Sierra Club's involved in litigation, and sometimes positions might be needed. But sometimes looking at interests can be another strategy. So the relationship, again, when you want to preserve the relationship, you look at the interests underlying. You must meet all parties' needs. So there might be some sort of MOU or some sort of document where you really do need to go out to the community and make it work with multiple groups. Water is a great example where you're usually dealing with a lot of different user groups with a lot of different interests. Cooperate to solve problems, and there might be several satisfactory solutions. So you might not come out with one. Next slide, please. This is another tool that we use, like the circle of conflict, to identify what the underlying interests are. I use this all the time. So we have different types of interests. Usually they're procedural. And when you were around the circle before the meeting started, I heard a lot of procedural questions. Do we have a process for this? If so, what is the process? Are we ready to vote? And so a lot of times breaking down the situation that's getting heated, this isn't really about substance right now, it's about process. So process is our desire to participate in something if we feel like the process is fair and transparent. And so this can come up a lot, and it might not be about the substance, it might just be, we wanna make sure we're following some sort of process for this decision making. So this can be a lot around decision making. Substantive would be those tangible, measurable goals. So dealing with different substantive issues, those are usually the ones we jump to and tend to be more positional. So dealing with making a decision about wolves. Wolves and what you agree or disagree on with the wolf itself would be the substance. The procedure might be, how are we going to take that vote today or not today to figure out our decision moving forward. Psychological. How we want to be treated in a group. We talked about respect. Sometimes somebody might just want an apology, right? Sometimes somebody just wants the chance to walk out of the room and have somebody come after them. So what are the different psychological conflicts that are coming up? And it really, like Kirby was bringing up, the conflicts that were coming up might not have even been substantive or procedural. It might be that people's feelings really got hurt. And so as mediators and as conflict resolution professionals, we break down situations and we sit down and we think about, okay, we had a conflict today. Was it even about the substance, or was it about procedure, or was it that somebody's feelings or ego got hurt? So trying to start, and we'll do this later when we're doing our simulation, trying to break down the interests, the underlying interests from the positions that you're hearing, and think about, okay, what are the substantive needs here? What are the procedural needs? And what are the psychological needs? And probably from working in groups, you'll notice some people are really process oriented. Some people just want to get the work done, get the task done. And some people want to sit back and say, whoa, 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 whoa. We need some ground rules. We need some process. And that in our industry can create a lot of conflict. So it's noticing what other people's needs are. And they might actually agree with you on the substance, but they want to know the process to get there. So this is a really helpful model in starting again to dissect conflict. Next slide, please. So we're going to practice. So here's actually one of our, we noticed that CDR Club worked on I-70, and this is, we work on the mountain corridor, so we don't work on I-70 Central, but this is one of the positional, I think we saw this on the Facebook page. We need to fight the widening of Central I-70 in Denver. You guys were actually getting congratulated on the Facebook page. We need to fight the widening of Central I-70 in Denver. We cannot widen highways unless we destroy the homes and businesses. Widening highways is not sustainable. So that's a position. And even if you agree with it, if you're trying to diffuse conflict, and if you know some members in your room actually are okay with I-70, what do you say to take out some of this language that feels really emotional, that feels really positional, to try to create a dialogue around it? What do you see as the underlying interests? And anyone who wants to jump in certainly can. And the interest, psychological, substantive, procedural. So if you're identifying interests here, you might see a power dynamic and an equity interest of these folks haven't even been included in the conversation. So good. So we have a procedural interest of giving people voice, and then we might have a psychological interest of equity and needing to make sure everyone is respected in this process.
Well, and I think the core substantive interest I see here is we want to protect homes and businesses, and we want transportation that's sustainable.
So we want vibrant communities. So and so the question would be, if you were talking to CDOT on this one, here's our interest. We want to protect communities. We want an equitable and transparent process. And I think CDOT, it would be hard for CDOT to say we don't want those things. So this is the process of moving toward mutual interests. Safety might be another. We want this to be a safe project. CDOT always wants things to be a safe project. So underlying this sort of toxic language, which is CDOT's never gonna listen. I mean, they hear this all the time. So how do we say something like this where we're using language that both parties can get involved with? And that was exactly it. We need a voice, we need procedural transparency, and we want vibrant, healthy communities that are viable and sustainable.
Another substantive interest is we don't want to do anything to encourage more individual vehicles on the road. That pertains to the sustainability language that's in the position. And that also could be a statement of interest that could appeal to other constituencies besides just environmentalists. So restating it as an interest rather than a position, encouraging, because we know as soon as you build it, they will come. And so highway widening, that's what happens, is it encourages more individual vehicles.
Good, exactly. So we're gonna move through a couple more of these. If you don't mind, next slide, you'll see what interests we popped in. Yeah, no problem. Community and environmental impact was an interest. Government accountability was something we heard in this. Public involvement process, what does that look like? Psychological respect for the communities and way of life. So how do we rephrase this toxic language? And we're gonna actually practice now a little further down how to say this differently. And it's hard when you actually agree with the statement because you just wanna say, yeah, moving on. So sometimes it can be hard to reframe when it's something that your values agree. How are you making it where you can actually create partnerships with folks outside of your organization? Next slide. So you wanna make sure that there's a balance here, and that's why it's helpful though to take a step back, identify your source of conflict, which in this case, we'd go back to our conflict circle and think, well, this seems to be values, this is data, this is political reality. You have a lot of sources here. And then take a step back and try to look at what interests you would be responding to and working with your team to think about what's the best response. In a public meeting, so we facilitate a lot of angry public meetings, the way we try to control the question answer is we do this a lot. We make sure that we're capturing what they're saying, but with non-toxic language. And sometimes people will say, no, I don't want you to write transparency and fundraising. I want you to write up there, Sierra Club is a crook. So that's where it really takes mediation skills to say, we're gonna really try to get to your underlying interests. And what I'm hearing from you is you're concerned about our fundraising transparency. And so in our public meetings, we will make sure they feel heard, and we might come back to that question later instead of get on a one-on-one debate. So one of the strategies we use in public meetings is actually go through all the questions from the audience first, reframe, and then we come back, we take a break, talk with our group to make sure we're on the same page, and we'll come back to the questions one by one as opposed to getting into it right there. And that way we make sure we get through the group, and it works pretty well. Because if you get stuck on one question, one issue, it can just get out of control. So let's keep practicing this. So next slide, please. Okay. This one is actually, we took it away from the Sierra Club. We made it more personal because we knew there was some interpersonal dealing with people. So this was not one from your Facebook page, but we wanted you to give a chance. This could be from a colleague. Maybe you wrote something to a colleague, and this is the response you get. Maybe it's in writing, maybe it's to your face. What are their interests here? This is a personal attack, right? You feel attacked, they feel attacked. Everyone's feeling attacked right now. What could be your response? Looking at the circle of conflict, looking at what their interests might be from a psychological, substantive, procedural issue. How might you be in their shoes right now? What might they be feeling, and how could you respond to this?
Other than the response you've already given them? Yeah, right, exactly. Because the response is, if you got a problem, say my thing.
That's what they're saying to you. That's what they're saying to you. You wrote some email. Let's have somebody we haven't heard from. No? You're good? Interests?
What's the question?
So the question is, we're identifying their interests. This is something that that you're hearing from somebody, and this is something that might fluster you, right? Somebody comes up to you, you're thinking about the email you wrote and you thought it was just to the colleague about how they're taking over all the meetings and they need to be controlled in the meetings because they're wasting everyone's time. Maybe that's what your email said. And they saw that email and they're coming to you and said this. How might you respond? What are their interests here? Yeah, Megan.
I'll wait because I'm the webinar. I'm guessing they have a value, I'll say kind of like against gossip, like they don't really want to have other folks talking about them. And I mean, say it to my face to me speaks to a value that they want the opportunity to hear it directly.
Psychological value. We'll go here and then please.
I was going to say, maybe they feel misrepresented. And so it would be, well, what did I say that's upsetting you or something like that? Because maybe what the person said was not accurate. And not just the personal that they want the information to their face. It's like, that's not true. Why did you say that in the first place?
And I think I'm sensing that they feel like they're lacking the trust that they thought they had in their friend or their associate, and, loyalty, respect. So something that they thought they had is missing, and it is very disappointing and, aggravating.
Right. Psychological interest there.
Yep.
The last one, and then we'll.
Yeah, just in terms of responding to this or things similar to this, the first thing that I'd like to say is thank you for bringing your concern to my attention. Can we talk?
Yep. Great. And sometimes that acknowledgement of feelings goes a long way with the I'm sorry, the thank you. Did I breach some trust issue here? Because maybe you thought you were writing a perfectly appropriate email about something being late, or yeah, it could have been. So great, good job. Next slide, please. Any questions on interest-based problem solving? Okay, we're gonna come back to it and actually practice reframing because that's a little harder than just identifying interest. Did you have something?
How do you avoid making an assumption that that the types of emails, where they come from? I heard it a little bit even here. We assume they're trying to sabotage the Sierra Club or something like that. And we make that assumption and then make our response based on that instead of taking a step saying, I have no idea what this person's concerns really are.
We assume good faith. That is in our process.
That's easy to say.
Yeah, so we take a step back. So I run a little nonprofit goat dairy in Boulder, Colorado, and it's right downtown. And so of course there's predators in Boulder. And we've had 2 times now where bears have come down and attacked the goats. A lot of times it's because they're coming for the garbage. So I have an interest in urban agriculture, conservation easement, teaching kids how to work with humane animal husbandry. But now we've had 2, and of course everyone loves that, right? But now we've had 2 bear attacks. In the second bear attack, the bear just hung around, wouldn't leave. We were banging things. CPW came, and they ended up putting the bear down. It was their recommendation, not ours. It was a really hard situation. Now on our Facebook posts, we're getting people saying, this farm doesn't know how to manage its animals. This farm is terrible. They're idiots. And it gets really personal. So taking that step back, I'm assuming good faith, right? I'm assuming actually we're on the same page here of wanting to connect people to animal communities in a positive way. She might be thinking about it from a bear perspective. I'm thinking about it from a goat perspective. We're coming into conflict. So I wrote back, I actually direct message, she wrote it on our recommendation section, gave us 1 star, said she would give us 0 stars if she could. I drafted, and then I took 5, right? I drafted sort of this email back that was like, you don't even know the stories. We didn't recommend the bear to die. We love bear. You're a jerk. You don't know anything. And I took a step back and I was like, thank you for your comment. I understand that we're both working toward creating positive interactions between animals and communities. She actually happens to be a veterinarian. So I asked her, we would love to talk one-on-one if you have ideas of how we could better manage the wildlife population and urban agriculture together. And she actually deleted her comment, never responded to me, deleted her comment, and didn't hear from her again. So that was my strategy. we would have responded publicly as well and appreciated her comment, but I think there are these things where I had to assume good faith, right? I had to assume that she wasn't trying to sabotage our farm. She was really mad that bears were dying due to urban agriculture, and she was mad that our practices didn't seem sustainable. But assuming that she was just trying to sabotage the farm would have been not a helpful way to deal with that approach. So all of the comments we see, they have different interests than we do. And in this polarized political context that we're working in, we have to assume that people have interests that are not just vile and trying to sabotage us. They have a reason for thinking differently. And our job is to figure out why they're thinking differently if we're doing conflict resolution, not necessarily advocacy. We'll go here and then here. Yeah.
So this is from Velma. Public conversations like Facebook are designed to influence others. So even people in bad faith who use shock tactics are trying to influence others. So addressing the issues raised is important to the wider audience. So I think it's common. I mean, I'm interested in your thoughts back to her on.
I don't think there's a one size fits all. I don't think there's a one size fits all approach. I think different comments elicit different responses and different tactics. So I think as a team working together, perhaps having a social media, from a process standpoint, protocol of when do we just shoot an email back, when do we take it back to our team and think about this response? Is it private? Is it public? Do we avoid it? I think having a communication protocol around social media is incredibly important, so everyone's on the same page with responses. And your organization is actually having a response that's been tailored to that specific conflict-causing incident.